And we know that people differ in extroversion, and extroverted people are gregarious and enthusiastic and assertive. And so they seem to wend their way through the world by utilizing social capital and social networks. Extroverts don't necessarily like you, but they like to be around you. And are creative people
extroverts?
No, creative people are slightly tilted towards extroversion, but that's not the fundamental dimension.
Okay.
Introverted people like to spend time alone, and there's plenty of creative introverted people. That another personality dimension is known as neuroticism, somewhat unflatteringly, and it's an index of sensitivity to negative emotion, so that if you know people who are volatile, they're touchy and they tend to fly off the handle, or they're sad or morose or anxious or tend to avoid stressful situations, then they tend to be higher in trait neuroticism. And that's specifically a negative emotion dimension. Extroversion is an index of positive emotion. And so they're separate biological systems, positive and negative emotion.
So I'm trying to get us back to creativity.
Yep. Well, the third category is agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate, and they basically live for close, intimate, personal relationships. There's conscientious people who are dutiful. And then there are open people. And the open people, the dimension is called openness to experience. They're people who are fundamentally interested in ideas. So if you're talking to an open person, they will immediately move the conversation to the discussion of ideas. So most of the people in the audience tonight, for those who aren't here for political curiosity, are here because they're open people. They want to hear an intellectual discussion. And so open people are interested in ideas. That's the intellect component of openness. And then they're also interested in aesthetics. And that would be where the artists really, intellect and aesthetics is where the artists come out. And the thing that's important to know about that, and it's why I went through all 5 traits, is that these are attributes and ways of looking at the world, ways of behaving that are fundamentally rooted in biology. They're very, very deep. It's not a surface trait by any stretch of the imagination. And creative people also tend to be higher in trait intelligence, technically speaking, and that's the ability to manipulate abstractions rapidly.
So is creativity a sort of second level then? Because the traits that you've just described don't include them. Where are they in that group?
Well, creativity loads very highly with openness. Creativity and openness are probably synonymous, more or less, although it isn't obvious that interest in ideas per se is the same as creativity, but there's very few people who are artistic who aren't very interested in ideas, so they move along the same path very tightly.
So let's unpack this notion, because it's axiomatic that creativity and art are indistinguishable. Is that true from the point of view of a psychologist?
I would say it's a pretty decent truth. It's open people are the ones that are interested in aesthetics. So, there are lots of people who are, in some sense, blind to beauty. It's actually one of the things that distinguishes, strangely enough, it distinguishes conservatives and liberals, roughly speaking, because liberal people tend to be high in openness. They tend to be creative, but they're low in trait conscientiousness, so they're not very dutiful. They're not particularly orderly. They're not particularly industrious, not compared to conservatives.
Liberals?
Yes. Well, it's partly because, you see, this is one of the paradoxes. Conservatives are high in conscientiousness, especially orderliness, and they're low in openness. And I think the reason for that in part is that it's not that easy to be creative if you're too industrious or orderly. Because imagine you want to be a musician and you're 18, 19 years old, or worse, 25 years old, Well, the thing is that it's an insane thing to do if you're someone who's dutiful and career-oriented and practical, because the probability that you're going to monetize your creativity is so low that it's futile to even attempt it in many situations. And so if you're too concerned with convention and productivity, then that's going to undercut your ability to manifest adherence to your creative vision, which also takes you in all sorts of directions, none of which are necessarily practical. So one of the ways of thinking about creativity is that it's a gambling strategy, and conservatives make low risk, low return, but certain bets, really. And whereas the more liberal types and the more creative types, they make high risk, high return bets. And so almost all of them fail. But those who succeed dramatically, and they also change the world. And so, although it's very foolish to be creative, it's creative people lead the vanguard forward into the unknown and transform the world. So foolish as it is, it's absolutely necessary.
Foolish because risky?
Yes, because risky, yes. I mean, it's foolish in the same way that a high risk, high return bet is foolish.